Sponsored by New Orleans Distillers, creators of fine spirits and liqueurs. Through dedication to science, art, and passion, blends of tradition and flavor emerge. For you, always locally crafted. New Orleans Distillers, classically Southern.
Tonight, as Russian military are advancing deeper into Ukraine, Russian stocks and ETFs are being delisted around the world. Job numbers came out today, out for February, and were better than expected. And Russian airstrikes hit Europe's largest nuclear power plant last night in Ukraine. A European disaster was narrowly averted. We'll have that and more on this Friday, March the 4th, 2022. Hi, and welcome to Wall Street Wrap-Up. I'm Andre Laborde. I hope your week went well. Tonight, we've got a great show with two terrific guests. Now, tonight, we're going to be talking with the senior correspondent from Fox Business Network, Charlie Gasparino. Charlie has covered so many business stories. We'll be discussing many of them, from what's going on in Congress about representatives in Washington trading stocks on their own account, to CNN's leadership changes and the scandals that made it happen. Charlie Gasparino from Fox Business Network in just a moment. And also, coming up tonight, we're going to be talking with Matt Shoemaker. Matt's a former counterintelligence analyst with the DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, who specializes in Russia and in China. We've got a lot to talk about with Matt Shoemaker, and he's going to be coming up tonight. But first, the Bureau of Labor Statistics came out today with their February report, and it was a good one. Non-farm payrolls rose higher than expected, adding 678,000 jobs last month for February. The unemployment rate dropped to 3.8%, but the average hourly earnings rose just slightly. Now, due to the increased inflation, that number is particularly worrisome because it shows Americans are not keeping up with the rising prices of inflation. Well, have you tried to fill up your car with gas this week? The price of oil hit over $110 per barrel in the United States this week, and that's the first time occurring in 11 years since 2011. And the average price of gas went up to this week to $3.73 per gallon nationwide. Now, a barrel of oil rose to $115 on the WTI, and that was up 25.75% in just 1 week alone. Over 25%. Some analysts said gas could hit $5 a gallon, and that's around the country, not just in California. And the cost of wheat rose 40% in just this week alone. It was another down week for the stocks, and the S&P 500 and the NASDAQ indexes all ended lower for the third straight week, and the Dow Jones ended the lower for the fourth straight week. And this week, the Dow Jones ended at 33,614, and it was down 1.3% for the week. The S&P 500 closed at 4328, and they were down 1.25% for the week. And the NASDAQ, they ended at 13,303, and that was down 2.75% for the week. So let's get to our first guest tonight. Charlie Gasparino is the senior correspondent for Fox Business and Fox News. He's also a columnist for the New York Post, and best of all, he's here with us tonight. Hi, Charlie. Welcome to Wall Street Wrap-Up.
Thanks for having me.
I know I was watching a report from you just a couple of days ago, and one of the things you said was about Jeff Zucker from CNN. Now, he was fired, for, it seems like, a relationship that was the most known secret around the whole network. Do you think there's more to that than meets the eye?
I think the problem begins and ends with Chris Cuomo in this sense. When they fired Chris thought he was done wrong. They fired him summarily, and they fired him and Jeff fired him without paying him any money on his contract. And on top of it, basically saying he's a bad guy. You know, he said he violated, not a bad guy, but violated journalistic norms by advising his brother. Chris doesn't think that. Chris thinks that, hey, you knew what I was doing. And by the way, you have over the years advised my brother when you were trying to get him on the air so many times during when he was like a star during the beginning of COVID. What I did was no different than what you did, and you knew materially most of what I did. That set the stage for what happened, in my view, because When that happened, it was clear that Chris was going to sue, or at least go to arbitration. He lawyered up. The lawyers went to CNN and said, we're coming for you, and we're going to take testimony from people, including Jeff Zucker and Alison Gollust, the woman that Zucker was having the affair with. Yes, the affair came out, whether Chris leaked it or not. He says he didn't. But I think more than that, they saw some of the sort of messy stuff involving Zucker and the way he ran the place, particularly as it appeared, it hits on Andrew Cuomo. I mean, Zucker and Gollust, who used to work for Andrew Cuomo, by the way, as a flack for the governor, they went out of their way to woo Andrew. They were giving him advice on how to do stuff, on how to do his press conferences, apparently. This is what Chris is saying. They, in Chris's view, did exactly what he did with his brother. And that's all going to come out. I think Chris is on strong grounds when he says, materially, Jeff Zucker, when he says he was surprised that I was so closely advising my brother, he knew most of that. I mean, he was allowing it. So, if I did one thing that he didn't know, but he knew 90% of everything else, that one thing, I think what put it over the line was, at least publicly stated, that Zucker stated that Chris was making calls on behalf, trying to figure out what type of stories were coming out. And what Chris is saying, why is that so materially different than all the other stuff you knew I was doing? He's got a good case. I mean, I've spoken with lawyers about it. I think they think that he's got something here. John Malone, I don't believe, who's a major shareholder in Discovery, which is now doing the deal, which is essentially owning CNN as part of the Warner Media transaction. Not a fan of Zucker's politics. Everybody involved wants this stuff to go away, so they cut him loose.
John Malone, who is a major stockholder with the merger about this to go on with AT&T and Discovery, he doesn't like the direction that CNN has been going in. And I'm just curious, was this just an easy way of making things fall into place before everything is signed?
It's not exactly the most absurd surmise out there. CNN gave us a great news story about themselves.
One of the things that you've also reported on is Elizabeth Holmes in Theranos. Now, I know fraud in the stock market goes way back to Jay Gould and Cornelius Vanderbilt, so that's not surprising, a fraud. But what I'm curious of is there were so many smart people, so-called smart people, that gave tens of millions of dollars and some 100 millions of dollars. I'm thinking of the DeVos family, for one, that went into this deal. Did that surprise you?
No. And here's why.
Okay.
Rich people, smart rich people, take flyers at all sorts of things. And this kind of had an appeal to it, right? It had some promising research. It had some really smart people on the board, so it had an imprimatur of stuff, a blood testing thing that gave people false hope that they can test their blood. They have diabetes and everything at home, and it didn't work, and it was used. That's bad. But if you notice, she hasn't been charged with harming any patients. What she was charged with is essentially ripping off some of the most sophisticated people out there. But the harm to them was de minimis. I mean, this didn't impact their net worth. This wasn't Bernie Madoff. When Bernie Madoff committed his fraud, I mean, people lost everything. A lot of rich people lost everything, or almost everything. The Wilpons, which were famously wealthy, the owners of the Mets, lost a lot, hundreds of millions of dollars. They had to sell the team because of that eventually. I don't know what the harm is here of ripping off people that take flyers on stuff that their materially it didn't impact their bottom line. And I think that I would be surprised if she gets a marginal jail sentence or none. If you told me she's not going to jail, I would be like, yeah, I think she is. Given
I know the last I heard, her lawyers are hoping that we'll keep her out of jail until after all appeals. Well, appeals could last, a couple of years easily.
They may allow that because this is not a case where average people got ripped off.
Recently, they've been talking in Congress about banning Congress from well, I'll use the term insider trading, but that's just loosely given. I mean, you know, you're their congressman. I know that when I don't know how it is at Fox Business, but I know at some networks that you cannot own stocks. You can own mutual funds, but you cannot own unless it's the company of your employment. What are you hearing?
You know, I'm not hearing that. Listen, Congress has got it. There's a lot of stuff on the plate. This does look sleazy. I will say this: insider trading, just so you know, nobody is exempt from that law. There's two types of insider trading. There's classic insider trading, which is an owner, a director, a CEO, an officer, knowing that the earnings are going to be bad or the company's going out of business, and she sells all her stock. That's classic insider trading. Then there's something that's ruled by the misappropriation theory, where you're outside, you're not an owner, you're not a director, you're not an officer, you're like me. And I somehow enter into a scheme with somebody to steal information that's owned by the shareholders of that company. And there has to be a payment or at least a favor given, a payment given of some sort. There's a mechanism for it that involves misappropriation theory. Nobody is exempt from that.
The ratings for NBC's Olympics, the Beijing Winter Olympics, are not what they were hoping. In fact, it's pretty down. Do you think that maybe companies will think twice about just going ahead and sponsoring because it's the Olympics, but also look to where they are, who's sponsoring them, and have more due diligence? What are your thoughts?
Well, if you think about it, yes. I mean, if they went and did the Moscow Olympics the next time, that would be probably a problem.
I remember I read one of your columns in the Post, New York Post, where you were talking about the Biden administration picking people for administrative positions.
The one they're fighting now for is Gigi Sohn at the FCC, who's very smart, brilliant legal mind when it comes to telecom. But man, it's been out there on Twitter and other places.
Wasn't it in your column? You had something. I'm talking about Gigi Sohn on this one. She was on a board that was negotiating at the same time, while she was already nominated or confirmed as FCC. What was
she was on the board of a very controversial company called Locast. Mm-hmm. Locast literally used to pirate local broadcast signals and basically set up a service for people who don't have cable, so you can see your local programming for free, or they actually ask for a donation if you want to give them a donation. And they did that because they were to tout themselves as a nonprofit, and apparently nonprofits can do that. The broadcasters sued Locast and said, no. First off, you shouldn't be able to do this. Because you asked for a donation, you're technically not a nonprofit, and you're taking our broadcast signals. Judge agreed. Gigi did not negotiate that deal with. Let me back up a minute. Then they reached a settlement with the broadcasters that after the judge imposed a $32 million settlement, they came back and cut a deal with the broadcasters where they only have to pay $700,000. So, lo and behold, they cut that deal like right around the time she got her nomination, right? And then lo and behold, the broadcasters dropped their opposition to her nomination later on. So people are saying, is this a conflict of interest? You know, and were they looking to curry favor with her? Because she could be their regulator.
Charlie, I hope this may not be the last. I always enjoy watching you and reading your columns.
Anytime. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlie. Well, coming up in just a moment, we're going to be talking with former DIA counterintelligence analyst Matt Shoemaker. Now, if you've got a question, though, about finance or a comment about the show, we would love to hear from you. Make it pithy or concise and write us at andre@wallstreetwrapup.info. And now for a look ahead for next week. But first, it was on this day, back in 1901, that J.P. Morgan, the banker himself, formed the first $1 billion company ever with Andrew Carnegie's Carnegie Steel. What did Morgan rename it? We'll have that answer in just a minute. Well, on this day in 1901, J.P. Morgan formed the first $1 billion company ever with Andrew Carnegie's Carnegie Steel. What did Morgan rename it? U.S. Steel. Well, let's get to our next guest. Matt Shoemaker was the Defense Intelligence Agency as an analyst and counterintelligence officer. The Russian invasion into Ukraine is into its second week right now, and tonight we've got an expert into the minds of the Kremlin. Hi, Matt. Welcome to Wall Street Wrap-Up.
Thank you for having me.
Looks like they're doing a ceasefire, and what's being reported. Can you trust Vladimir Putin for a ceasefire, or is he just buying time for trying to resupply his units?
The short answer would be, especially in war, don't trust anything. In this situation, there's probably a little bit of both things occurring. They're probably restacking and reevaluating things, and at the same time, they are allowing things such as civilians to exit the cities and possibly even get supplies in. So there's a lot of different options, and they're taking advantage of it, to be honest.
It seems like, from what I understand, is that they were telling their own Russian soldiers that when they go into Ukraine, that they're going to be welcomed in. Well, they're finding out that that's just the opposite of what's going on. And from reports that I'm hearing, is that Russian soldiers are even damaging their own equipment, such as their own fuel tanks, so that they run out of gas, so they can't proceed even further. Do you think morale is becoming either is becoming or has been now a problem with Russian soldiers?
Yes, I think that in this particular campaign, we're finding that morale is playing an integral part of it, especially on the Russian side. With regards to what you just mentioned about the soldiers damaging their own equipment so that they don't have to fight, this is really a situation where they are really fighting what they perceive to be their brothers. There's really no comparison or anything comparable in the West to really the sort of familial relationship that the Slavic peoples have with each other. So the way that the morale is occurring, especially with the ground forces, it's quite telling, considering how if a Russian soldier were to abandon his obligations, that is at the very least an imprisonable offense, if not something that could rise to the level of possible execution even. So the fact that they're doing this is really extraordinary. On the other hand, though, what we're seeing with regards to the air campaign, there doesn't seem to be as much reticence, if you will, because it's a little bit more standoffish, if you will. So morale seems to be playing a little bit less of an issue.
This week, was it, or maybe it was like 4 or 5 days ago, Vladimir Putin threw out the gauntlet of he's putting his nuclear arsenal on alert. Now, to what extent does that mean, I don't know, but just because of using the words nuclear arsenal on alert sent shivers throughout the free world. Do you think that's a ploy, or do you think that really he's being trapped into a corner and possibly may use?
Well, that's an excellent question. The answer is a little bit complex. As far as I can tell from the media reports of Russian nuclear readiness, there's actually no category in Russian doctrine for what special alert means. For example, the U.S. has defense condition levels, or they're known as DEFCON, and it goes from 5 being the lowest and 1 being the highest. The Russians also have a numbered system of readiness. It's 1 through 4, where 4 is the highest. And that's where nuclear weapon use is approved. But from the reports that I've seen, there hasn't really been any change in the status of Russia's nuclear weapons, which is good news. But why he said it is it's attempting to understand what message the Russians are trying to send and who the message is intended for. In my opinion, this message was not meant to scare Ukrainians, actually. But in Putin's mind, if it does, then it's kind of like killing 2 birds with 1 stone. It likely was intended for the West as a way to tell us to kind of back off. Mm-hmm. Additionally, it's possible this was intended for China, interestingly enough, just as much as it was for us. Historically, the Russians have been extremely paranoid that they would be invaded and overthrown. It's been invaded countless times over its 1,000-year history, so their paranoia isn't exactly unjustified, especially since they've been invaded from the Mongolia region, which is not too far from China. So I think that was also a warning to China as much as it was to us, because Russia also moved a significant amount of its Siberian border units that are usually meant as a deterrence for China. They moved them to fight in Ukraine. So Russia's far eastern border now is significantly weakened, and if China decided to become adventurous, that's a problem for Putin.
In the last 70 years of Russian technology and I should say tactics, is because like in October of 1962, they didn't pre-warn that they were going to be putting missiles in Cuba, or when they were going into Georgia, or when they were going into Afghanistan. They didn't pre-warn, they just went off and did it. Because I was just wondering if they were just saber rattling to making sure that they did not want the United States or any other NATO country to be involved.
Sure, and I think this is an issue that we in the West kind of struggle with, and it's really trying to understand how Russians perceive the world and what their thought process usually is. And it's very different from us in the West. Us in the West, we think very legalistically and we think very linearly. And by legalistically, I mean in the sense of how many times that have you and I both heard in the course of civil discussion, well, where is that written? Mm-hmm. And that's a way of valuing that something that is written down, that which is part of the rule of law, has more weight to it or more significance than something that is not written down or is not published, for example. In the Russian mindset, they don't have that same sort of experience with the rule of law and the value of the written rule as we do. Things are much more fluid and malleable because, frankly, I mean, under Soviet control, the law was whatever the tough guy wanted.
I'm curious what we were talking before about nuclear weapons, where they were talking about the thermobaric. They have not, from what I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong, they have not used a thermobaric, or also known as a vacuum bomb, but they have moved in the launchers for them. Is this just another saber rattling, you think? And for our audience, could you describe what a vacuum bomb is?
Sure. A vacuum bomb, it's also known as a thermobaric bomb. It's a style of, it's like a chemical weapon, actually, that releases a highly flammable chemical into the area, and then a secondary charge ignites the chemical. It uses the surrounding oxygen, at least, as fuel, which is why it's described as kind of sucking in the air from the area. When used against the population, this massive pressure change so quickly causes essentially the lungs to explode. And if that didn't kill you, the highly corrosive nature of the chemical used would burn you to death if the fire blast and the shockwave didn't already do that. It's, in theory at least, supposed to be used to clear such as a field or an area so that you can use it to land helicopters or drop air supplies. But when used against a population, it really is a horrific way to die. It's a very brutal weapon, and it's only surpassed in its brutality by nuclear weapons. We have seen the launchers themselves. The launcher itself it's called a TOS-1 and a TOS-1 Alpha. These vehicles, at least, they house the vacuum bomb rockets on top of them. There are about 24 of these rockets mounted onto a T-72 chassis. And it's interesting, at least, because the TOS-1, they're not assigned to any regular military units. They're only assigned to specific Russian special forces who are trained in how to use these weapons. But one report I saw indicated that a TOS-1 Alpha had been abandoned in a Ukrainian field with all of its rockets unfired. It appeared to have been left there for possibly a couple of reasons. One is that it was stuck in the mud, which is a horrifying prospect for an invading army. Mm-hmm. And the second reason is that since it was just left there, it tells me that the morale, even amongst Russian special forces, is significantly degraded. Under normal circumstances, soldiers would never abandon armor and weapons like that, especially of that caliber. If they were to abandon it, they would at the very least be imprisoned, as I mentioned before, back in Russia.
Matt, with this type of a weapon to be used, would this have to come from Vladimir Putin himself, or is he a delegator, that he would delegate something like this to his field commanders?
Under normal circumstances, based off of how the Russian military is organized, President Putin, he's not a micromanager. And under normal circumstances, this kind of decision would not rise to the level of what requires a presidential approval. Usually that would probably come from somewhere in the general staff itself. Now, having said that, from the Russian perspective, it's entirely possible that using a thermobaric vacuum bomb, these TOS-1s, for example, it's entirely possible that they see this as defensive and they see it as a form of restraint, which is a very odd perspective because we in the West would see it as very escalatory and very antagonistic. The reason the Russians would see it as defensive or holding back is because they know that the next step is nuclear weapons after this.
Matt, would something like this, a vacuum bomb, a thermobaric bomb, would this fall within the bounds of the Geneva Rules of Convention of Warfare, or would this be such as chemical weapons that would be outside of the bounds?
So under no circumstances should this ever be used against a population. This would, under normal circumstances, only be used to such as clear a field.
Matt, as long as this war is continuing much faster than it really was thought of, is Vladimir Putin's position as head of Russia, is that in jeopardy, or is he cemented in there like a Joseph Stalin, or unlike a Nikita Khrushchev, where when the missiles in October of Cuba were dismantled, Khrushchev was out and Brezhnev was in?
Putin does not rule by the consent of the governed. He hasn't ruled that way for a number of years.
I'm just curious, do you think in the mindset of Vladimir Putin, do you think he feels now that he's bitten off more than he can chew?
In a perfect world, yes. President Putin probably feels that things are not going to plan and that they could have gone a lot more smoothly. But because he has not changed any of his goals and they are simply changing the tactics by which they are going about them, and by that I mean they seem to be shifting less from a heavy ground assault, and they seem to be moving more into a sort of air campaign. His goals have not changed.
Matt, I've got a lot more questions. I hope you come back. It's thoroughly interesting hearing your thoughts on it.
It was my pleasure being here. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Matt. Well, in a couple of weeks, we're going to be talking with former ambassador to Russia and to the ambassador to the United Nations, Ambassador Tom Pickering. That'll be in a couple of weeks. But next week on Wall Street Wrap-Up, we're going to be talking with the founder and first commanding officer of Army's Delta Force, Lieutenant General Jerry Boykin. Now, General Boykin, he knew the military needed a nimble elite fighting force to combat everything from airline takedowns by terrorists to hostage extractions. General Boykin both founded and was the first commanding officer of Army's Delta Force. And I'll bet he's got a lot to say about the Russian invasion. That's next week, Lieutenant General Jerry Boykin. And by the way, no, the founder of Delta Force was not Chuck Norris. We've got the real deal next week. As a reminder, we repeat the show on Sunday mornings, but the best way is to set your DVR so you'll never miss an episode. And that's our show for this Friday, March the 4th, 2022. Hope you've enjoyed it. My thanks to Charlie Gasparino from Fox Business Network and Matt Shoemaker for joining us this evening. But as always, it's you. We appreciate you for allowing us into your homes tonight. Remember, you can always follow us on all the social media, on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and WYES.org. So enjoy your weekend ahead and a productive week as well. I'll see you next week. For Wall Street Wrap-Up, I'm Andre Laborde. And remember, money never sleeps. Good night.
Sponsored by New Orleans Distillers, creators of fine spirits and liqueurs. Through dedication to science, art, and passion, blends of tradition and flavor emerge. For you, always locally crafted. New Orleans Distillers, classically Southern.